usually you do things in a certain way and you assume, and you know what happens when you assume,
Yeah, of
but you
course. Yeah.
assume that you need to treat others as you like to be treated. But the problem is that we don't all want to be treated in the same way. We don't all want the same gifts.
Yeah.
Not like tickets to go see a football game. I'm not interested, even though I know my my partner does.
Yeah.
No, give me a pair of earrings. That's what I want. I don't want
Yeah.
that. So that's the issue. So a lot of times, what I see mostly is a big disconnect between cultures that are more task oriented and cultures that are more relationship oriented. And of course, that's going to have a direct impact on how people communicate.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Melting Pot. Today, I am in conversation with María Garaitonandia. She is the author of Untangling Communications, which is a book I can see right behind in front of me, which is behind her. She's also a professor and corporate trainer based out of Florida. And thank you for waking up so early in the morning for this conversation. And I'm really happy to be talking to you today, Maria.
Thank you, Payal. I feel very honored to be here on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Maria, let's kickstart the conversation with you describing yourself as a third culture kid. Can you share a story that really stood out for you where you became aware of how important culture is when it shapes communication and the way it shapes communication?
Sure. The fact that as a child I had to say goodbye to my friends every 3 or 4 years and be the new kid in school, sometimes in the middle of the school year, you learn pretty quickly that you better learn to observe and adjust before you try to come in with your own way of doing things because you can make lots of mistakes. So, for example, I remember living in Puerto Rico, and things were very informal there. People in the Caribbean tend to be informal. The language is informal. People will sometimes say a few obscenities here and there just to give a little punch to their communication. And then we moved to Mexico, which is much more formal, and people tend to be very careful of the way, the form of doing things. And so, of course, I jump in with my way of doing things and realize that when people would look at me funny when I would use certain words, I realized that I had to adjust very quickly if I wanted to be accepted. Because let's face it, all of us, even when we're kids, yes, but even when we're adults, we want to be able to fit in and be accepted, both at a personal and in the workplace. We want to be able to feel like we have a sense of belonging, that people respect us and they want us to be part of their group. So that's one of the lessons that I learned very early on, and that is that it's very important to be able to observe the dynamics around you and learn from it, and then be able to communicate in the way that is more palatable to your receiver. It makes life so much easier.
Yeah, that is so true. When you talk about moving between countries and schools, that was pretty much my life as well. And so I can very easily resonate with what you're saying because I went through similar situations, and it's clear to see that when you try, like you've mentioned, you tried to adapt and realized very quickly that in order to be able to integrate, in order to be able to communicate with the culture that you've now become a part of, it's important to make that little switch. And that makes a lot of sense. So, how, when did you realize in your career that interpersonal intelligence was the missing piece in how you found leaders communicating?
I think it all stems from my experience as a third culture kid.
Yeah.
And I think you will relate when somebody asks you, where are you from? It's not a
Yeah.
one word answer. You have to give all the context,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yes, I was born here, but I was raised here. So
Yeah.
that's part
Yeah.
of it. So
Yeah.
I think that really helped me. It gave me the sensitivity to understand that a lot of our knots when it comes to communicating have to do with that power of observation that came to me from my experience as a third culture kid. And I started my career actually training executives and expats on how to communicate. For example, I lived in Mexico for 20 years. So how to adjust and adapt and how to work with your team in this new country and make the least amount of mistakes possible. So get through that learning curve a lot quicker so
Yeah.
that executives could give feedback properly, motivate their teams, etc. So I worked for a long time coaching teams and leaders on cross-cultural issues. But of course, that morphed into other things because most of us are now working cross-culturally, if you think about it,
Yeah.
thanks to technology. So we are working constantly with teams on the other side of the planet. You and I are speaking, and we're on two sides of the planet. It's incredible. But a lot of the issues that come up are somewhat similar to the very important issue of being able to be situational in the way that you speak.
Mm.
So I became a corporate coach and I started designing programs that had to do not only with the intercultural element, but with communication in general and helping leaders and teams untangle those knots, which with my third culture lens, I was able to identify a little bit easier so that they could get things working and get things done.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense because I think it's very important. I think communication is the key. For example, they may be highly qualified with technical skills, but which is their sort of domain. But when it comes to actually communicating because when you're in a corporate situation, the marketing team, there's so many different aspects to the business. So how do you help people with technical skills to actually slip into a way in which they're able to communicate a lot easier with other departments or other parts of the business that they are in?
Well, that's a great question. And just like in an intercultural world, we speak different languages, have different accents. There's words that might be false cognates, that might mean one thing in one culture, and you have the same word, but it means
Yeah.
something completely different in another. The same thing can happen between organizations or within a corporation or organization within different areas, which tends to create the silos, right? Whether it's,
Yeah.
oh, my key performance indicator is in direct competition with yours or whatever. It's a lot about being able to speak your message in a way that will be palatable and resonate with the other area.
Yeah.
So just like we know there's different personality types and you might communicate with a results-driven person in one way, you also need to know what is important to the person you're speaking to so that you can form your message in a way that is interesting or motivates the other person to want to collaborate with you. I developed a very simple methodology in my book that I call CLEAR.
Yeah.
It's very simple. You start off first with conveying context. If you can start off by telling the other person why you are about to make a request or why you are doing what you are doing, you are offering the courtesy of your reasoning before getting into the what and the how. It makes it a lot easier for the other person to align with you and be like, okay, I see where you're coming from. So the next thing that we talk about, so first the conveying of the context, that why needs to be crystal clear. And I think this works across cultures. You might want to give some cultures need more context, others need less. But nevertheless, even if it's a 2-sentence context, if you start with the why, makes things a lot easier. You move from context to the listening and empathizing, which means that now you are open, because the other person might be like, that might be your why, but it's not my why. So that's the moment where you have to listen and empathize, asking open-ended questions and being able to think beyond your need.
Yeah.
And then lastly, you have the A and the R, which is the adjust and reframe. That's where, with the information you've gathered from your listening and empathizing, you can put together, first of all, in your mind, adjust your original proposal and be able to reframe it in a way that contemplates a win-win situation. This very simple model can make life easier for anyone, really,
Yeah.
even at home.
Yeah.
So that usually, I can tell you, it even helps me with my son, who has special needs, and it's helped me at a personal level to be able to communicate with him and makes our relationship so much smoother.
Yeah, so basically it's not just the words, it's firstly the context, and then, the tone, and then that's how you're able to bridge that gap in terms of communication, is my understanding of what you're saying.
Yes, and sometimes it's just the order in which you present things.
Yeah,
Start already with the what and the how. If you say, we need to do this and this is how we need to do it, sometimes our instinct is, but why?
yeah,
So
yeah,
if you start with the why, you're saving so much time, effort, and energy by
correct.
just starting with a little bit of context
Yeah, no,
to
absolutely.
avoid the pushback.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And as you've said, it's so simple. It's just so simple, just 3 words. And if you're able to put them in the right order, that's half the battle won. No, that makes a lot of sense. Because you've worked in and with so many different cultures, what are some of the very stark communication differences that you have observed being in connecting with or being in these different environments outside? Now I'm not talking about your growing up years, but more in terms of your career. What are some of the differences that have really stood out for you, and then how have you been able to address it and bring it back into what you do as a corporate trainer?
This is one of my favorite questions, because if I could tell you all the anecdotes of all the stumbles and knots that a lot of my clients face. And again, it's because you do things in a certain way and you assume, and you know what happens when you assume.
Yeah, of
But you
course.
assume that you need to treat others as you like to be treated. But the problem is that we don't all want to be treated in the same way. We don't all want the same gifts.
Yeah,
Not like tickets to go see a football game. I'm not interested, even though I know my partner does.
yeah,
No, give me a pair of earrings. That's what
yeah,
I want. I don't want
yeah,
that. So that's the issue. So a lot of times, what I see mostly is a big disconnect between cultures that are more task oriented and cultures that are more relationship oriented. And of course, that's going to have a direct impact on how people communicate. Because if you're more task oriented, you might not have the big antenna that help you realize the unwritten little cues and the subtext, because you're not into having to interpret everything. It's just give it to me straight. I don't want to have to interpret stuff. So, I'm going to give it to you so you don't have to interpret it, because you're, again, assuming that everyone wants to communicate the way you like to be communicated to.
yeah,
On the other hand, if you're more relationship oriented, you're going to be like, hey, you got to be nice. You got to save face. You got to consider the other person's sense of dignity. Say things in a different way. Be a little bit more diplomatic. Those are usually the biggest problems that I see that cause conflict, because people misunderstand the other person's style and they attribute something personal to it when it's just a cultural difference. I'll give you an example.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
A simple example, something that's very silly, but there was an American who was telling me that his colleagues in Mexico, when they would text him and via Teams, they would say something like, "Hi, Eric, how are you?" And then they would leave it at that. It would annoy the heck out of him because it's like, why are they asking me how I am and just like leaving? I don't have time for this. What is wrong with them? Why can't, and then he goes, I feel obligated, like, fine, and you, and then they ask me for something or they tell me something. What are they waiting for? And he says, this is such a waste of time. This is ridiculous. And of course, I had to explain to Eric, your colleagues in Mexico come from a very relationship-oriented culture. The way that they are raised from a very early age is you always need to recognize the humanity of the other person by greeting them. The greeting protocol is sacred.
Yeah.
You need to say hello first. How are you? You are important as a human being. And then you can get into the nitty-gritty of the business as usual. Otherwise, you're saying you're not important, you're just a human resource. And that's extremely rude. And he was like, oh. So now all of a sudden, something that was so annoying to him, now he understood the why behind it. And he was willing, go ahead and give the other person what they needed. And it was funny because when I mentioned this to the Mexican team, they laughed. They're like,
Never struck
how
them.
would I?
Yeah.
I was annoying the American guy. I had no
Yeah.
idea. It's like that's how we do things. You don't want to be rude and assume that you're there just to solve my problem with it.
Yeah.
So what is courteous and polite in one culture can be very rude in another.
Yeah.
Even though respect is a universal concept, the way that we show respect is going
It's
to
different.
vary.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. It all boils down to communication. So I think if you're working with someone from a different culture, then it works both ways. Both need to understand how the other's culture requires something in terms of some way of communication, and to be able to do it. It doesn't cost anything at all. So communication is really the key. And the way you've simplified it with starting with the why is such an important tool for everyone who's listening in or watching to have an understanding of. And so is that really the core of what you do?
Yes, I have been working with teams and leaders for 25 years, untangling all of those communication knots and basically finding out where it stems from, whether it's an intercultural issue, whether it's a matter of not knowing how to give feedback properly or managing a conflict, or even intergenerational things,
Yeah.
which we see so much of now, because we see that in the 2000s, there was a huge shift from real-time synchronous communication via phone call or in person to all of a sudden asynchronous texting communication, which changed the patterns of communication immensely. And our habits changed. And of course, there are certain benefits, but there's also disadvantages to having shifted to a more technological way to communicate. And by the way, I recently read that miscommunication can cost, at least in the US, it costs companies something like $1.2 trillion annually. And a lot of it, and this is from a Harrison Grammarly poll on the state of communication in 2023, I believe. And it says that a lot of it is because there is now an over-reliance on written communication. Because again, you started with the millennials who started texting. And as young people, they weren't used to, hey. So when you don't use a certain skill, you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. So you find that starting in that generation, people tended to be a little shy about solving problems real time. especially with people they don't know. And it's not like I'm blaming all the millennials and Gen Zers, but there was a change. And even now you can see, Payal, how many times do people call you spontaneously on your phone anymore?
Yeah.
People ask permission usually. So even there, we see that you have to make an appointment to call somebody, which may be great in certain aspects, but in a corporate environment, you need to be able to go to somebody and tap them on the shoulder, or sometimes you need to be able to just say, let's get on a Teams call. I'm calling you right now. Instead of going back and forth and back and forth, you have a huge opportunity cost when you have an over-reliance on written communication and it's not working. There's an important aspect, which is knowing how to discern when to switch from asynchronous communication to real-time synchronous communication.
And also the human touch
Of course.
is so important. That angle is, you're absolutely right, because we all now have this way of, and it's so easy to generate emails. It's with technology. It's so everything is on your fingertips now, and you just type and it's there. But then it does not necessarily, it's not speaking your inner language. So I think that's the missing link now, that human touch. And you mentioned empathy as well. So I think, I think you're absolutely right that communication has so many aspects to it.
Yes. And how do you convey empathy? And I know now our generative AI does a wonderful job of writing emails that exude emotional intelligence and whatnot. But there's still the part that AI can't do, which is understand the whys behind things,
Yeah.
be able to convey the nonverbal.
Yeah.
All of those things, you can only do so much, even with a beautifully crafted email. But the relationship, again, a lot of things get done through relationship building. And if you miss each opportunity to build a relationship or even small talk, I saw this funny video that this young woman did on LinkedIn, and she was saying, oh my gosh, small talk is so cringe, but it's a necessary evil. And I had to laugh because I thought, okay, I'm from a different generation, but small talk is not cringe. It's easy. Not only that, but it's beautiful to be able how you can connect with a stranger,
Correct. Yeah. And I was going to
finding
say,
something you have in
yeah.
common. It's beautiful. It's not cringe.
And it closes the
And
gap. It closes the gap. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Yeah, it's not cringe at all. Okay, there are different levels to small talk as well. So it depends on the context that she was referring to. But no, yeah, it's that whole being able to, like you and us talking, right? This is communication. I know we're in different parts of the world, and I know that it's day for you and night for me and all of that. But we're still, and I'm not in Florida and you're not in Singapore, but it's an easy conversation where I'm getting to know you and understand where you come from and what your business is and how you're trying to help and enable people to be able to communicate in the way that doesn't miss out on nuances, and that really is helping people understand that there are so many different ways of communication, and the why is so important when you start building that communication. I think it's so important in all our lives. And you mentioned personal as well, and I completely agree with you. It's great what you're doing, and I'm really curious to read your book as well. So what's next for you, Maria?
I have been delving more into keynote speaking. I have been training for over 25 years. And now my hope is to be able to reach more audiences through shorter programs for associations or conferences. That's a move I'm making. And perhaps I might come out with another book, Untangling Culture. So I don't know. That's
Oh,
something
interesting.
I'm thinking about where I can delve a little deeper into the cultural aspect.
Yeah,
So
which I think is an integral part of your life, as it
yeah,
is mine. So
yeah.
I think both. I mean, you do it professionally. Maybe in some way, I'm also doing it professionally through a podcast, the
Right.
communication and the culture aspects. So, yeah, I think these are two very key ways in which, for better understanding, for human understanding. Yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing, Maria, and thank you. I've really enjoyed listening to you, and I've enjoyed our conversation and the fact that we've got so many similarities in terms of being a third culture kid, in terms of having lived in so many different parts of the world, in terms of how we've built our identities just purely by the way we've grown up. I think is also interesting. So I'm happy that we were able to also connect on a different level. And thank you, and do keep me posted on what's happening next in terms of your book and on culture, because I'd be very curious to read that as well. And thank you so much for being a part of Melting Pot. Any last messages for the viewers and the listeners that you would like to share?
I would just say my one piece of advice is always assume that people have positive intent. Sometimes we make things up in our head, but people are good and they're doing their best. So if you assume positive intent, you'll probably be able to untangle that knot a little bit easier.
Yeah, the key is positive intent. Yes. On that note, thank you so much, Maria. Thank you.